Member Montana, good morning. This is Elaine. Can we do a quick mic check, please?
Good morning.
Good morning. We can hear you. Good morning, Margaret.
Morning,
Can we do a
Elaine.
quick? Good
How are
morning.
you? How's
I'm
everyone?
doing fantastic.
All right.
Elaine,
Good.
I'm sorry,
Good
Elaine, I'm
morning.
going to start the recording now.
Okay, let's just do a quick mic check for Mayor Gilmore. Mayor Gilmore, can you say something just so we're sure that we can hear you?
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Member Carrasco.
Good morning.
Good morning. Member Simidian, can we do a quick mic check, please?
Good morning. This is Joe Simidian. Can you hear us loud and clear at this end?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you.
All right, for the record, we are now recording.
Good morning, Member Perales. Can we do a quick mic check, please?
Good morning. Can you hear me well?
Morning. Kathleen, can we do a quick mic check, please? You're on mute, my dear.
How's this? Good morning.
Perfect. All right, Chair Hendricks, we actually have a quorum, so we can go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So good morning to everyone. Our workshop meeting is now called to order. Thank you everyone for attending today's workshop. As a reminder, we're going to try and adjourn this meeting at 11 so we can have our board orientation meeting. And I just wanted to go ahead and say it's great to see everybody's faces on video, but I don't know about all you, but I can't wait for when we can come back and start having in-person meetings, because I really miss being able to actually see you guys face to face and in person. At this time, if everybody can unmute their mics, and Rainey, can we please have a roll call?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Abekoga,
Here.
Bankley, Burt,
Here.
Carrasco,
Present.
Chavez,
Here.
Constantine,
Present.
Davis, Gilmore,
Here.
Jimenez,
Here.
Lee, Ricardo, Montano,
Here.
Cole, Perales,
Here.
Rennie,
Here.
Simitian,
Here.
Jones,
Present.
Chairperson Hendricks.
Attending.
Thank
Okay.
you, Mr. Chairperson. You have a quorum.
Awesome. Thank you.
Ricardo's present as well. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. So next we're going to move to public comment. This is a reminder for those who want to address the board under public comment. Please use the raise hand function in the app, or if you're on your phone, press *9. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons desiring to address the board of directors on any item within the board's jurisdiction, but not on our agenda. I encourage those with customer service concerns to contact our customer service department after you make your comments, and their contact information is going to be on the screen. And I've got to go ahead and get my screen changed here. Do we have any public comments?
Yes, we do, Mr. Chair. But before I call on the first speaker, we'd like to inform on the record that Mr. Matt Kennedy's written public comment has been received and it is posted online.
Thank you.
Mr. Lebron, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Good morning, Chair, members. I just want to give you a brief update on the meeting that was held in Gilroy last night. Those of you who haven't heard, VTA staff and consultants are proposing to turn the entire Gilroy Caltrain parking lot to TOD. It was very clear that the staff and the consultants have been at this for a while. They've actually got a plan of when they're going to be bringing forward an approval of a developer to the board. The mayor of Gilroy, I've never heard of this, neither has Supervisor Wasserman, whose district it is. My recommendations to the board are: number one, stop this project immediately. Number two, engage Caltrain to purchase every single VTA Caltrain parking lot from the VTA. And number three, direct staff to refocus their TOD activities to the 34 acres surrounding the Santa Teresa Light Rail Station. Thank you.
Mr. Beekman, you may go ahead and begin speaking. Next speaker, last digit number.
And maybe we should try Mr. Beekman again, because I think the
Yes.
wrong
I'm
person
here.
got selected. There you
Go
go.
ahead, please.
I had a question first. Is it possible that you can go to another public speaker and I can be last? Because I'm still kind of sorting out a few things. with
You're
my-
the last one right now in the queue.
Oh, okay. Well, I will try my best here. Thank you. The ideas of continuity will be important in what has been many changes VTA in the past few months. I will do my part to remind of good practices of the summer and fall and of the past few years. It is then up to yourselves how to address the mostly positive idealism and sustainability I try to work towards and offer. I hope you will be learning the ideas of how to develop a good perspective with this project today. The Route 85 committee last fall wanted to hold tight on previous plans how to address their needs along the 85 route. I've made my own suggestions of housing concept studies that can be good examples in the current thinking needed for a state 85 committee. And from this, how a small piecemeal fashion, how this project today can develop a small niche of studying questions by the 85 committee. I hope all of this is toward the goals of an open process, open and shared public.
Okay, thank you. I think that was our last public speaker. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the actual workshop, which is item 3.1. This is to receive an update on the next generation high capacity transit study. I want to emphasize that this is an update on the study and staff will be presenting potential scenarios. There are no decisions. Staff is not seeking board action at this time. Instead, they're looking for our feedback about this. So I just want to really ask everybody to stay engaged. This is about being able to look forward into the future of what we're going to be doing. And your information and insights are going to be really helpful as we continue through this process. Deborah DeGang, Chief Planning and Program Officer, and Jason Kim, Senior Transportation Planning, Transit Capital Planning, will be providing our presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the floor over to them.
All right, thank you, Chair Hendricks, and I appreciate the emphasis. Just to reiterate what the chair said is, I do want to emphasize that what we're presenting to you is we're really at a key point in the study where what we're trying to do is give you some of our initial results and getting your feedback in the study as we're developing these scenarios. I know you're very used to getting things ready for your recommendation, but we feel like this is such a big decision to be made that we wanted to come to you before we finished our study and while we're still developing scenarios. Jason Kim has been managing this study, and so I'm going to turn it over to him for the bulk of the presentation.
Great, thanks, Deborah. If we can go to the next slide, I think maybe slide, you can go to the next one as well. Great. I also want to mention that we have David Nelson here with Jacobs Engineering Group, who are the consultants on the study. So they'll also be handling part of the presentation today. So to give you some context of the study was requested by the board to assess potential options for the future, specifically of the light rail system. We know that our light rail fleet is aging and it may need to be replaced sometime within the next 10 years. And so we really wanted to put together a study to inform the board about all the different options the board has on how to move forward. We initiated the study in May of 2020 last year, and we've been bringing updates to the Capital Program Committee throughout last year. Today, we're going to be reflecting on some of those updates that we brought to the committee, as well as showing you some of the feedback, or sorry, some of the directions and the scenarios that we plan to move forward with, at least to get feedback on. After that, we'll be refining the scenarios, taking back all the feedback we've heard today, and then we'll be completing the study. I do want to note that at the end of this, what we're really going to have is a study. As Chair Hendricks was saying, we're not going to have a formal recommendation as part of the study process. It really is to provide information to the board so the board could move forward with their decision-making process. Then if we go to the next slide, we want to talk about today's agenda. I've already discussed the context for today's study. We're going to preview or review some of the existing work that's been conducted. And then the brunt of the presentation is going to be about detailing 3 potential scenarios. The scenarios that we're going to detail are The first one is essentially keeping our light rail system and buying a new light rail fleet, but some strategies about how to extend the useful life of the fleet, as well as start piloting some new technologies. The second scenario we're looking at is integrating buses into the light rail corridor, what that looks like, what that would entail, and the kinds of flexibility it would bring us. The last scenario is looking at replacing the entire light rail corridor with an exclusive right-of-way transit system. This was actually not recommended by the Capital Program Committee, but it's something we want to show today just to give you a capital cost comparison of what we expect something like this to cost. If we go to the next slide, I do want to touch a little bit about the feedback we've heard from the Capital Program Committee. They wanted us to focus on the modes that are the most appropriate for VTA. This includes modes that really meet our speed and capacity requirements and dropping everything that doesn't. That includes, some like bus services on general roadways and not in a dedicated guideway, and some of the kind of more out there technologies like gondolas, for example. We also want to make sure that we kept open opportunities to pilot new technologies and maybe incrementally implement some of the things that we are discussing today. And I think one of the things that we heard loud and clear is that we want to be as flexible as possible with our operations going forward, both the operations that we're serving, but also the operations that we allow in the light rail corridor. If we go to the next slide, something I would like the board to reflect on today during this presentation just are some questions for the specific kinds of feedback that we want. Is there any additional information the board needs to make a decision about the future of the light rail system? Which ideas that we're talking about today should be further analyzed and which should be dropped? And if there's any refinements to the scenarios that the board would like analyzed. With that, I'm going to kind of start jumping into the presentation. So if we go to the next slide. To give you some context for our light rail system, our light rail system is 42 miles of right-of-way. It actually puts us in the top third of all light rail agencies nationwide in terms of size. We have an average daily ridership of about 27,000 boardings. This was pre-pandemic. Our light rail speeds can get pretty fast. Light rail as a technology can typically go up to about 55 to 65 miles per hour. But our average speeds are closer to 15 to 25 miles per hour due to the significant number of at-grade crossings we have through our system. In terms of our light rail fleet, we have about 98 train cars right now, but we typically only use about 2/3 of those on a typical daily service. On Levi's event days and other special times, we do use more than the 61 cars, but on an average daily basis, 61 cars is typically what we would call our peak pullout number. The typical life expectancy of a light rail vehicle is about 30 years or about 1 million miles or so. And we've purchased the vehicles around the year 2000 to 2003. So we would expect the useful life of the vehicles to end roughly within around 2030 or so. The next slide, want to detail some of the key observations from our system. We have relatively low ridership, and we have relatively high operating costs and maintenance costs. I do want to differentiate those two. Operating costs deals mainly with paying the operators or paying ongoing costs such as traction power. For buses, it would be paying for the diesel fuel. The maintenance costs are more related to maintaining our system, maintaining the tracks, maintaining the infrastructure. Those are costs that we have to pay regardless of if we run one train or we run 100 trains. Our system and vehicles are actually very well maintained through the system. We've done a review of it, and we've basically been hitting all our maintenance marks from all our trains. And 2 points I really want to hit home is that our slow speeds from the light rail system are mostly due to the significant number of at-grade crossings. I think I mentioned we have about 100 throughout our system. Any other technology that was operating with all these at-grade intersections would probably have pretty similar speeds to light rail. Additionally, the key factor for ridership on a transit system is the land use densities around that system. And our light rail corridors typically have low land use densities around them today. And so really that's kind of what keeps our ridership artificially low. In terms of what this means for technology and different modes and how that may impact our system, a new technology or mode may increase our operating flexibility, but it probably won't decrease our maintenance costs if we go with a completely brand new mode that requires significant infrastructure changes. And a brand new mode may have limited impact on ridership. As I mentioned, really the key to ridership are the land use densities around the system, and it may not improve our system speeds. If we go to the next slide, we want to start talking about the modes and technologies we looked at. Jacobs did a pretty extensive look at us for technologies both nationwide and across the world. We also supplemented that with information from the Diridon Airport Stevens Creek RFI that the city of San Jose put out. VTA was one of the members of the steering committee for that, and we really took a lot of the information from those specific technology vendors. When we look at this table, the technologies on the left, or the modes on the left, are the modes that we don't think are essentially congruent with VTA speed and capacity requirements. They either are not high enough to serve the existing light rail corridor, or they require infrastructure that just doesn't make sense for the light rail corridor. The modes on the top right are the modes that could potentially meet our speed and capacity requirements, but at least where we understand these modes today, they do require full grade separation. Sorry, excuse me. I do want to touch on here that this includes some of the more innovative technologies, such as personal rapid transit or group rapid transit. These are technologies that are still pretty new, and they're developing and are changing pretty quickly. We do note that there are a handful of pilot projects showing personal rapid transit throughout the country that operate not at grade separated configurations. They operate at grade. A lot of these pilots are pretty limited though. I think maybe the most prominent one might be the one in Jacksonville today, where it is about a half-mile test track that's operating at grade, but they limit their speeds to about 15 miles per hour, and they only serve 2 stops. So what we're seeing is that there are some promise to these technologies, but with at least how we understand them today, we believe they would require a fully grade separated system if we were to switch over to them on VTA system. This then goes down to what technologies or modes can operate for VTA in at-grade configurations. And this leads us to light rail, bus rapid transit, and buses in a separated transit way. If we go to the next slide, our technology refinements, just to give you a brief overview, is that there's no one single mode that stands out. VTA actually has a lot of options on how to move forward. Some of the standard modes like bus and light rail meet our speed and capacity requirements, but may not need significant infrastructure changes. While a non-standard mode may require pretty significant infrastructure changes and just inherently has some more risks because we haven't seen any of these systems developed into a full large system as large as VTAs. We also believe that these autonomous features are coming to all vehicles in the near to medium term future. So another way of thinking about that is while these PRT and GRT technologies are purporting that they could operate autonomously today, but they require full grade separation, we might as well wait for buses and light rail trains to be able to operate autonomously in the current configurations because we know it's coming. If we go to the next slide, I do want to hand it off to David Nelson right now to talk a little bit about where we see light rail automation specifically going. Go ahead, David.
Thank you very much, Jason. Light rail automation, as little as 3 years ago, was something that really was not at all seriously discussed. And I can remember in 2019, seeing a formal presentation on it, my first formal presentation, and lights went on over my head, going, oh my goodness. Out of the business of self-driving car research and the development of self-driving automobiles, which your area is the worldwide leader in the development of that technology, their transit industry in Europe and to less extent in Asia are looking at ways to install the safety features and the automated operation features that are in automobiles that are now in testing in California and around the world to increase safety. And now they are doing demonstration deployments in places as far-flung as Germany, Poland, Russia, and China. Next slide. How does this work? Just like if you have a high-end automobile, and pretty soon it's going to be every automobile in America that you buy new, there's a radar system that will in the front of the car that identifies what it determines to be obstacles, and if you don't stop for those obstacles, it will apply the brakes for you. That same sort of millimeter wave radar is integral to these systems. They also have a high resolution video camera. Most new trains now have a camera in the front end anyway for accident recording and monitoring of employee behavior. And it uses those two features with artificial intelligence and some other elements to allow the vehicle first to just aid the driver in safety. And then with experience and with time, nobody's doing it on a revenue basis at this point, then be able to make it so that the operator is less involved in running the vehicle and more involved in customer service, and then eventually reaching the point where the operator is superfluous. Next slide, please. Now, how does it do all this? This photograph is a representation of how the computer sees the railroad in front of it. This is from a company in Russia who are among the leaders in this particular application. And as you can see, it identifies the pedestrians as units that are not normally there. One of the things that the train comes to know is the route. They know the route extraordinarily well. They never forget. They notice everything. They're never distracted. They're the model employee in many regards for operating a train, because it's a dull and boring job, and humans' attentions wander. But one of the things I draw to your attention as well, you see up in the upper right-hand corner, there's a box around the signals. The computer also reads the signals. So it knows if you've got a red and you try to go, it's going to stop you. And eventually, when it's running itself, it will read the signals as the operator does. This, compared to other automated train operation scenarios, is a significant reduction, a significant breakthrough, in that most automated trains that have been implemented in the last 40 years, or all of them, rely on central control to tell them whether or not they can go or not go. But now that we have a robot that can see, that's in the control cab, he, she, it can look at the signals and react to the signals just like a human, or just like a robot managed car. Next slide, please. Is this you or me, Jason?
That is you, David.
Oh, it is. Okay. So the light rail automation outlook has got some really interesting elements, and I've mentioned many of them. No upgrades required to the existing signal system infrastructure. When you get into the environment where you're operating without operators, you're allowed to increase the frequency while reducing your operating costs. That may be 25 years away or 20 years away. It improves operating flexibility when you're autonomous. The existing vehicles can be retrofitted for autonomous operations in most cases. All of the demonstration deployments that are going on around the world are retrofitting vehicles. They're not buying new vehicles. It's not an awful lot of material needs to be added to the car. The technology will be ready in the near to immediate or medium term. The regulations, the public acceptance, the working with the workforce will take longer. And in the short run, though, just putting the system on the train to monitor operations and provide a level of driver assistance creates an increased level of safety. In Boston, they're installing these with no stated intention to automate the operation. It's just to reduce this, the incidence of accidents where people step in front of trains, or there's inattention on the part of the operator, and one train happens to run into another one. So with that, next slide, back to Jason.
Great, thanks, David. So at this point, we did want to get into the three scenarios that we've developed. As I mentioned, these are completely conceptual, and it's really just to give the board some ideas about how to move forward. We're not making an actual recommendation on any of these three scenarios, and we are looking to the board to provide us feedback on what they want to see us do more of, and what ideas in these scenarios that they want us to look into more. So as I mentioned, looks like the slide got cut off a little bit, but that should be okay. The first scenario that we're looking at is essentially keeping our light rail system, buying a new fleet of light rail vehicles, but using some strategies to extend the life of our fleet to essentially give us more time to make a full decision and maybe even pilot some autonomous technologies. The second scenario that we're looking at is integrating buses into the light rail system, which would mean pretty significant infrastructure changes to allow for this, but it would give us the most operating flexibility, much more than we have today. And then the last scenario, as I mentioned, this is not recommended by the Capital Program Committee, but this would be to decommission the light rail system and build an exclusive right-of-way transit system. If we go to the next slide, the light rail scenario is essentially that we would be keeping the fleet or the system almost exactly as is. We would essentially be buying a new light rail fleet, but one of the, I guess, key options that we're previewing here is that extending the useful life of the fleet. So at our current pace, we think the useful life of the fleet would reach its end by about 2032 or so. Today, we mostly operate 2-car trains. So essentially 2 train consists that are hooked together and operate as one train. If we operated more single-car trains, so essentially cutting that capacity in half, we could extend the useful life of our fleet by about 7 years or so and save about $10 million per year. Kind of an analogy I've been using to describe this is, say you had a piece of bread and you are spreading some peanut butter on it. You could spread it pretty thickly on half the slice of bread, but then you would only have peanut butter on half the slice of bread. You could take that same amount of peanut butter and spread it pretty thinly over the entire piece of bread to make it go longer. That's essentially what we're doing with the light rail fleet. We're just taking it, spreading it out over a longer period of time. We're not actually using more or less miles from the fleet. We're just spreading it out. And then I do want to hand it back over to David, talk about what a automation pilot for light rail could potentially look like for VTA.
And just to add a little bit to what Jason was just saying, when we started this project before the pandemic, we were looking at your ridership levels. Single car trains would carry the ridership that you were carrying before the pandemic without overcrowding the trains, which is why we were intrigued by this option that there's a certain amount of excess capacity that's being provided in the scheduling that you were doing before the pandemic. But let's talk about the pilot to automation. This is a rapidly emerging and rapidly evolving technology in the light rail environment. A number of systems are looking at this, mostly, as I said, in Europe and Asia. The pathway to real automation is 5 to 15 years out. And the way you would implement this and the way the others are implementing it is to retrofit a small subfleet of the vehicles and then work with it and teach the computer and then work through the system to eventually deploy the technology in an autonomous self-driving mode when the regulations, the workforce, and the passengers are ready for it. Next slide, please. There's typically 7 steps over time that are done with these demonstrations. First, the hardware and software is installed on a small number of trains. It allows you to install and debug the software. The artificial intelligence begins to learn the routes. The next step is to implement automated emergency braking, just like you have on your automobile. You won't be able to buy a car in 2022 in the United States that doesn't have automatic emergency braking. And the artificial intelligence continues to learn. Over time, as confidence in the system builds and you begin to do more driver's assistance functions, you know, locking the doors or opening the doors or checking to see if there's any passengers that are running for the train. Then the next big jump is a depot autonomous pilot, where you allow the train to operate by itself, but you do it inside the maintenance depot. So it goes from the wash track to the storage tracks and the storage tracks to the maintenance bay without an operator in the cab. And it allows you to demonstrate and allows you to get confidence that this robot can follow instructions and safely maneuver the trains. Over time, you do more advanced driver assistance, and then 3 years out, 5 years out, you do a non-revenue street demonstration. You invite the public officials, you invite the public, you invite the press. You demonstrate that this technology that you've been working on and that so far has been working in a safety and a driver assistance type mode now is at least tentatively ready, is ready to go out with training wheels to operate in the street. At that point, it becomes a regulatory and an acceptance issue. In time, I don't think that I'd be surprised if the first autonomous self-driving vehicle in America that's in will be a light rail car, but it could be. But as self-driving taxis and self-driving shuttles come into more wide use, then you're positioned as an organization with a team of robot trains that have been trained that can run your network when you decide to do so. With that, how long will that be? It won't be 3 years, but I don't think it'll be 20 either. It's somewhere in that range. Thank you. Next slide.
If I can add a little bit to what David is talking about with the automation. Just to give you an example, I think what we've been seeing in terms of the world and some of these automation pilots is that the operator is pretty key into piloting these technologies and just really understanding how they work and kind of how they serve the community. I've been looking into this automation pilot, automated bus pilot in Singapore, where they actually currently have 2 operators on board when they're testing it out. But one pilot who's behind the wheel at all times to make sure that they can take control of the vehicle anytime that they need to. And then there's another operator on board who acts as more of an ambassador. He's the one, or they're the one that will help someone in a wheelchair get to their position, or if there's any questions about the autonomous bus, they're the ones that are answering those questions. And so as David was saying, like right now with the way automation pilots are going, the operator is still on board. They're still doing a lot of the duties. This is just to kind of, a lot of the features that we're using right now are trying to add in an additional fail-safe, such as if there is something in the guideway, both the bus and the operator can react to it. So this is kind of where we see this technology going, at least in the short term. As David said, in terms of a long-term implementation of full autonomous technologies, we're not sure when that's going to come. It could be as little as 3 years. It could be as long as 20 years. I think it's probably somewhere on the longer term, mostly because the regulatory nature is really the thing that's going to take the longest. Just getting people to feel safe enough to allow this. I do want to talk a little bit about the risks and challenges associated with this scenario. Essentially, we would be continuing to rely on light rail as a technology. We know that light rail has higher maintenance and operating costs than buses. We also know that our light rail system has some flaws in it. Again, we're pretty slow because of the at-grade crossings, and we have some locations of track in our system that could probably be improved or just has some significant issues. There's also some risks about being an early adopter into really any technology, but specifically autonomous technologies. Essentially, we would be holding the burden for some of these things that we really need to kind of understand, at least for kind of the technology as a whole. Another way to go about it is we just wait till another agency has really figured this out, and then we adopt that technology. But if we really want to be a first mover out there, there are some risks associated with that. There are some benefits, though. This scenario would have pretty limited capital costs. We wouldn't change much to the system. And there wouldn't be any significant changes to the passenger experience. Our light rail passengers who have been riding since before the pandemic would probably not feel any significant changes. Even with new vehicles, they would just kind of realize it's a new vehicle, but a lot of the way they use the system wouldn't change very much. If we go to the next slide, I do want to talk about what an implementation timeline looks like for this. So typically, the timeline to purchase a new light rail fleet is roughly about 5 years from the day you put the order in to the day you start receiving the vehicles. So if the useful life of our fleet is in about 2030 to 2032, we would probably have to order new vehicles sometime in the 2025 to 2026 time range. However, we would probably need to make a decision about what to do a couple of years before that. There's a couple pre-steps VTA would need to take before putting in an order. Typically, we would put specifications together for the vehicles about how many seats we need, how long we need the train, what kind of features it needs. So really, if we kept the status quo and didn't change our operations, we would probably have to decide about what to do with our fleet in the next 2 to 3 years. By extending the life of the useful life of the fleet, that essentially pushes this entire decision timeframe out up to 7 years. Even if we did a fraction of this and just reduced some of our light rail vehicles throughout the system and just extended the useful life by 3 to 4 years, that's still pretty valuable time for us to better understand what to do next. I should also note here that we are proposing to buy a smaller light rail fleet to better suit our capacity needs. As I mentioned today, we only use about 2/3 of our cars in a daily service. Most agencies use about 75% of their cars in a daily service. So a fleet that would be more appropriate for VTA would be about a 75 car fleet, which is what we're proposing here today. In 15 years from now, if we realize we need more cars, we can just put in a new order for cars at that point. Most agencies buy their cars in kind of portions or groups, as opposed to buying a whole fleet at one time. And lastly, I do want to note that with the autonomous piloting, we can really start that at any time and take as long as we need for that. I think the key here would be, do we decide to wait till we buy a new fleet and have all those autonomous features added onto those cars then? Or do we start retrofitting our existing vehicles or our new vehicles before or after we feel comfortable with the autonomous technology? If we go to the next slide, I do want to run over to the next scenario. So this would be integrating buses and light rail into the existing light rail corridor. Essentially, we'd be recommending piloting this on one small segment in the beginning to make sure that we feel comfortable with these operations and we like them. We also believe a full system conversion for this could take decades. It may seem easy to just pave over the tracks, but there's a lot of complicated engineering and structural work that would need to be involved to allow for this. I would also recommend combining this with extending the life of the light rail system to give us the most flexibility going forward. If we go to the next slide, an example of this are Pittsburgh and Seattle. Seattle is probably the most prominent example. They have a 1.5 mile long tunnel underneath downtown that allows for both buses and light rail vehicles. They're actually taking the buses out of this tunnel right now to get more light rail throughput through the tunnel. I do want to note, though, that these are just short segments, and there's no system-wide examples of doing this in our country. If we go to the next slide, I mostly want to note that our system is configured in various types of right-of-way configurations and track configurations. And what we would really need to do, if we go to the next slide, is unify that into a more uniform set of structures. Essentially, we would be embedding track or panelizing track for about 76 miles. And we would be needing to install some pretty significant signaling systems for a large portion of our system. The picture on the bottom shows essentially what panelizing track is. You would put these concrete panels down that would still have the rail exposed. And so this would allow for buses and light rail vehicles to both operate on it at the same time. If we go to the next slide, in terms of the risks and challenges, essentially buses are incompatible. Most of the bus infrastructure is incompatible with this. So we would probably have to buy some specialized buses to allow for these operations. We also think the transition period would take a very long time, as I mentioned, decades. I think the biggest key here, though, is regulatory-wise, the California Public Utilities Commission doesn't currently allow for this. So another reason to try a pilot out is to make sure and show to both the public and the CPUC that this is a safe operation, and there's actually some benefits in it for us. And there are some pretty big benefits from this. We would increase the utilization of our right-of-way, and it would greatly improve our operating flexibility. Essentially, it would allow us to change the amount of service we're putting out there to better serve the number of passengers who are actually out there. And it would potentially improve our bus speeds and may reduce our operating costs. If we go to the next slide on the schedule, the first two portions are similar to the last schedule I showed, except we would recommend buying a smaller light rail fleet. If we are running more bus service, then we could probably get away with a smaller fleet of about 40 light rail cars. The bottom portion is really what this integration timeline looks like. As I mentioned, we would probably pilot it on North First Street first. It's a section of our system that would have the least amount of infrastructure changes needed to allow for these types of operations. If we do like this, then we could start implementing it throughout the rest of the system, the blue and green lines and the orange line. The key here, though, is once we start implementing it on a much larger part of the system, we'd have to probably purchase about 100 total buses over a 30-year period to supplement the reduction in light rail service that we were anticipating. Next slide. The last scenario that we're noting is the exclusive right-of-way transit system. As I mentioned, this is not recommended by the Capital Program Committee. We're mostly showing it for comparison purposes. We believe it's a multi-billion-dollar investment, at least with current construction methods and typical projects where we see systems like this. And it would be a pretty major disruption to both our light rail passengers who use the system, as well as the communities where these systems are located, because we would essentially be building large elevated structures throughout our county. If we go to the next slide, essentially we'd be taking most of our system, completely decommissioning it, demolishing it, and building a brand new system in its place. The red portion of our system is already grade separated, so it would allow us to do it a little more easily, but it would still take some pretty significant work to allow for a new system. If we go to the next slide, we really want to show you just a very high level look at what the capital costs look like for these kinds of scenarios. For the light rail scenario, all-in costs would be about $500 million, but a vast majority of that would be for the new fleet of vehicles. Light rail vehicles are about $5 million each or so. A lot of the other costs are associated with piloting some of these new technologies. I will note in here, though, that if we were to stay with the light rail system and we wanted to make some major changes to the system, those costs are not associated in here. For the integrated bus and light rail system, we would reduce our vehicle procurement costs a little bit. You know, as I mentioned, we'd be buying a much smaller light rail fleet. But the systems that it would take to allow for these kinds of operations would be roughly about $750,000. So all of $1 billion. So really all-in costs would be about $1 billion total to allow for these operations. For the exclusive right-of-way transit system, these costs are based on, again, similar projects we've seen in the world recently. And we think to convert our entire system would be roughly a $13 billion investment. In terms of operating cost savings, as I mentioned, for the light rail operating cost savings, we think we could save about $10 million a year in the short term by operating shorter trains. For the integrated bus and light rail scenario, because we'd be operating less light rail service, that savings goes down a little bit, down to about $6 million. In terms of what we would save in terms of operating costs, the integrated bus and light rail operations, we think would save us about $5 million net. Essentially what we're seeing here is if we shifted a lot of our lowest ridership trips on light rail to bus service, such as our night service, our weekend service, we'd save about $15 million from our light rail operating budget, but we would have to supplement that with about $10 million in increasing our bus operating budget to pay for those. If we go to the next slide, to kind of summarize the three scenarios, the light rail scenario would have the least capital investment, would be the least disruptive to passengers, but would have the highest maintenance costs, and essentially we'd be keeping the status quo. For the integrated bus and light rail scenario, there would be some significant capital investments needed to allow for this, but it does afford us the most operating flexibility going forward. There would be some operating cost savings, and there would be some minor service disruptions during the conversion process. For the exclusive right-of-way transit scenario, it's a multi-billion-dollar investment, and there's a lot of significant risks and unknowns, especially if we decide to move forward with a unproven technology or technology that we haven't seen with a large-scale implementation. So if we go to the next slide, I want to go back to those questions that I asked at the beginning of the presentation. After seeing this presentation, is there additional information the board needs to make a decision on the future of the light rail system? Which of the ideas that we presented today should be further analyzed or should be dropped? And are there any refinements of the scenarios that the board would like to see? And with that, I think we'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. A lot of good information right there. Before I go to my board colleagues, I was going to go ahead and go to public comment. So if we can go ahead and go to that first. I see we've got a couple speakers.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Before I call the attendees, I'd like to note for the record that we received Zachary Lebron comments and is now posted online. Mr. Lebron, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
In 1 minute, the slides are not numbered. The abandoned Almaden line is ready for paving. The Santa Teresa line to downtown is ready for automated operations. Loop is missing from the list. Single cars will never work between Santa Teresa and downtown because of Caltrain, Artemian, and San Jose State. The speed speed of the light rail needs to be increased to 70 miles an hour between Santa Teresa and downtown. There is no need to replace any rail cars until 2030. Why aren't staff considering increasing ridership instead of reducing the capacity of the light rail? And if you run without operators, crime is going to get out of control on the light rail system.
Thank you.
Mr. Ramses, you may begin speaking when you're ready. Ramses?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me now? There we go. I had my mic too far away. Good morning, board. Ramses Madhu. I'm the division manager of planning, policy, and sustainability for the DOT here in San Jose. And I also am the project manager for the RFI looking at the airport connector in Stevens Creek line. Wanted to add just a couple thoughts for board's consideration. One, what's the real scope of this study? And what's the overall question we're really trying to answer? Right, what we really want to know is how do we increase the usefulness of our transit right-of-way to increase ridership, right? We want to know how we can make the transit ridership increase as much as possible. And right now we're looking at potentially reducing riders capacity and looking at really long time frames for new technology. We have a very short time to start meeting equity and environmental goals. And I think that we need to ask bigger questions about where the overall system is going.
Next speakers, Michael, followed by Ryan, and then Big Man. Michael, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
When the first 20 miles light rail line was completed in 1991, it was busy. But then VTA started cutting back on connecting buses, such as the Almaden, Hillsdale, and Blossom Hill buses. When it was getting too difficult to connect to light rail, ridership predictably fell. VTA also cut back on light rail frequency. It used to be 10 minutes on weekdays, now it's 20. It used to be 15 minutes on weekends, now it's 30. Predictably, ridership also has fallen. But then there are tens of thousands who depend on light rail, and there's still hope. Light rail is not a standalone system. The stronger the connecting transit network is, the higher the light rail ridership will be. When BART arrives in downtown San Jose, when Caltrain is electrified and service is added, if buses increase, light rail ridership will increase. VTA must buy new cars to invest in the system, not abandon it. Thank you.
Ryan, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Good morning, directors. My name is Ryan Globus, and I would urge you to simply purchase new light rail cars when their lifespan is over and improve the existing service. So I used to live and will again live near the Green Line, and from Dearborn to Winchester, it has everything that's best about light rail. And I encourage you all to ride that section from Dearborn to Winchester if you haven't already. The track is a straight line, has its own dedicated right-of-way and crossing guards. So there's no need to wait at the lights. If we can expand those principles, especially the crossing guards, to the rest of the system, we can greatly improve service and ridership without the need to spend a bunch of money on retrofitting the lines for buses or on untested technology. So please save light rail by simply purchasing new cars and reducing the amount of time they have to wait at lights. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Beekman, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Thank you. It is my understanding it is the delivery of small packages and peaches using AV technology that is what can be our more regular practices in the next 10 to 15 years. This sort of project will also have to take into account Bay Area natural disasters in the next 5 to 10 years. There is an incredibly important VTA project about the future of electric buses and its charging stations and its budget needs. And that can very much help address the future of green sustainability and renewable needs. It's had well-established practices and ideas developing for several years now that I hope this AV project today will not be competitive with and non-hype. I hope this meeting today can be a good example of how to begin a new era and more open shared process between VTA projects and the community. I hope we can share our projects and ideas. Thank you.
Next speaker, Sid, followed by H, and then Raj. Sid, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi, thank you. I'd like to echo what some of the previous commenters said, and that I think the best goal to aim for is increasing the usefulness of our existing system. And I believe the best way to do that is by extending the life of the existing light rail vehicles and beginning to purchase new ones. As Mr. Kim rightly pointed out, the best way to increase ridership would be to reform land use around the corridor and encourage denser development to make the system more useful for customers. Additionally, improving connections in the form of buses, as well as the BART extension and Caltrain electrification could further make the system useful. And using the existing system as is would save the most money available for operations to increase frequency and further improve the effectiveness of the system. So I hope the board chooses to go with preserving the existing system and improving it over time. Thank you.
H.
Hi, Hayden Miller. I don't know, my name got cut off. But
Oh.
anyways, I just want to say that I think there needs to be more focus on improving and growing ridership on the existing system, such as purchasing new cars and maybe extending the life of the current cars if it does not reduce the capacity. I think ways to do this are increasing the frequency and increasing the speed. Riding along some sections, such as all the way down First Street, it's incredibly slow and it's annoying to have to just watch all the other traffic go by while I'm sitting on this slow train. And I think improving bus connections is also helpful. Maybe that's expanding it, but maybe it's making the existing ones higher quality. Some of the connections I've had to make, you have to run up a set of stairs, run down another one, and then you miss the train, and then you have to wait 30 minutes for the next one because the frequencies are so messed up. So I think there's a lot of improvement in the current system that's possible.
Raj, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Good morning, board. This is Raj Singh, ATU representative. Just want to say how quite alarming it is that what this study has become and how hard it's pushing for us to go into the autonomous direction. In the same board meeting where the motion was made for this study, the board also unanimously voted to finally move forward with extending the light rail to East San Jose, as it was promised when we asked the community to pass Measure A. We had over 100 community members speak at that meeting. We don't know who or what is pushing for this, but I suggest we follow the money and we'll find out. This will eventually be a threat to our community. We have over 2,200 employees at VTA and roughly 35,000 employees in public transit in California. So we really need to take a hard look at what we are doing here. These are very good jobs and stable careers. Innovation is great, but at what cost? We should be looking at increasing service to get the public back to pre-pandemic.
I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce your name correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anno, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi, hello, hi, my name is Anno. Sorry, my name is a little bit hard to pronounce. I would like to echo several past comments about extending the lifespan of the current fleet, and then after their lifespans ended, purchasing new and replacing the fleet. I do agree with other concerns about reforming land use around corridors. I think your current transit-oriented development program is great and should move forward, and that should be accelerated. And I also understand concerns about costs, especially during COVID, but with further connections with BART and Caltrain's electrification, I think that there is a possibility that VTA has a bright future ahead of it, and more people are going to call San Jose their home, just like I did. We can't fit everyone, all these new people, into cars, and I think people will need VTA and other transit systems in order to get where they have to go. So thank you for your time.
Next speakers would be Monica, followed by Bob, and then Zachary. Monica, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi, my name is Monica Mallon, and I'm a lifelong transit rider. I really feel like there's been too much focus on innovation here and not enough focus on making what we have better. We've invested so much time and money in the light rail, and maybe some mistakes were made when it was built, but I think it still has a lot of potential. As others have said, when BART comes to downtown San Jose and Caltrain is electrified, and more frequent, the light rail ridership will go up. And if you look back at old data, the light rail ridership was higher when there was more service on the light rail system and the bus system. So please don't act like the light rail is destined for failure. Lastly, I just want to say that an autonomous transit system, a system without human operators, isn't a system that I want to ride personally. VTA operators make transit safe. They help us when we get lost and confused, and they sometimes even save lives. The human element of transit is so important to us, so please don't forget that.
Thank you. Zachary, you may begin speaking when you're ready. Zachary?
Good morning, board. Zachary Lebron, Chief Business Development Officer at Glideways. Glideways was created to address many of the challenges we face with public transit, moving massive numbers of people safely and affordably. Rubber tires on concrete, battery electric, small autonomous vehicles, we can run at grade, elevated, or underground with simple commodity right of way. Glideways is developed and operated through costs low enough that the fares we pay today can support the build out, financing, and operation of the entire system. We can do this because instead of running a huge train with a single passenger, Glideways only moves when people want to travel, making our infrastructure light and affordable. Case in point, our RFI, San Jose RFI consortium submission with Plenary Group, Obayashi, Webcore, and Roush outlines a system that is a magnitude less cost than is stipulated in the study. Transit does not need to be subsidized. Glideways was optimized to build, operate, and privately finance on farebox alone. We will have an operating system by the middle of this year in Contra Costa County, and also have studies with South San Francisco and 4 cities in East Contra Costa County. Appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Bob, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi, my name is Bob. I'm a resident of San Jose and a frequent VTA user. I'm very concerned by the push towards automation. From the presentation, it definitely sounded like a large part of this goal was simply to eliminate operator jobs. I'm strongly opposed to that. I think these are good jobs, that provide people with a good opportunity to live in San Jose, which is a very expensive area. I also think that there's too much focus on sort of new shiny technology when there's plenty of well understood best practices we could be following on VTA that we're not. We could be having signal priority for buses and light rail. We could be improving the grade separation of light rail, which is only true in a few parts of the system right now. And we could be increasing the speed through places like downtown. I'd much rather see money and energy directed toward these efforts, which are definitely proven best practices of transit systems around the world, rather than focus on sort of new shiny things just because they seem innovative. I would encourage us to extend the lifespan of the existing vehicles as much as possible, to purchase new ones afterwards, and to continue operating light rail.
Kirk, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Thanks. I thought it was an informative presentation, but it went around what I think is the elephant in the room, which is the really, really slow operating speeds. And we know how to fix that pretty cheaply with signal prioritization, crossing gates, fencing. Those are things that we can do pretty cheap, and then that will increase ridership and will also reduce operating and maintenance costs because it takes less time for the train to get from one end of the route to the other, so you need fewer of them. So yeah, I was going to recommend focusing on that. Thank you.
That concludes our public speaking, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So that was the last of our public speakers. I'm going to close the public speaker section of this now. So I'm going to move to my board colleagues, and the first hand I see up is Mayor Liccardo. If you're talking, we can't hear you, Sam. Sam, I can't hear you right now. It looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Sorry, forgive me, did you just lose my audio?
Yeah, we
Can I try that
hear you
again?
now. We hear you now.
I'm sorry, for some reason the audio cut off.
No, you're good.
The question was about our light rail system and how it compares to other
rail systems nationally in terms of fare box return? We get a sense of the comparison.
Sure. So we are relatively low when you compare us to other agencies. And as I mentioned, both our ridership is low and our operating costs and maintenance costs are high. So that kind of leads to a low fare box recovery.
Yeah.
I will note there's a couple, it is a little bit of a push on both sides though. You know, I think as some of the commenters have mentioned, our ridership has been higher in the past. We actually think it'll probably get higher once we really see a lot of the projects come into the area, such as, you know, BART Phase 2 to downtown and Diridon high-speed rail. So that would increase kind of the numerator part of that up. In terms of the denominator, I think what we're looking at is we know typically costs are pretty high in the Bay Area. And we, as I mentioned before, we have a very large system with so much to maintain. It just really does cost us a lot to maintain, you know, such a large system that we have.
But Jason, we've never had a very high fare box return, at least in the 14 years I've been on the VTA board. I've certainly never seen on light rail higher than 12, 13%. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's probably the right range.
And it's not just that we're relatively low. Aren't we the lowest in the United States?
For fare box recovery, I believe we are.
Okay, so it's not just a relatively low problem. We have a problem that by most standards of transit is a failing system. And we're struggling mightily to provide transit to people who critically need transit every day. And we have lacked the resources, and we're pouring a lot of money in a system that has the worst fare box return in the country. I went on Wikipedia just to check out fare box returns, and it looks like we're not the lowest in the world. There's one system, apparently, I think Orlando, but I think that's subsidized by Disney World. So we have a basic financial challenge. This is not a terribly sustainable model, and it's not like we just tried it. We've been trying it for decades. So I'm concerned about whether we've really explored options fully here. And when, you know, Teresa Neal was on the board and she and I authored the memo, and we had extensive conversations with Maria Fernandez. We had really, what we were concerned about was multi-$100-million capital expenditures that would be required to actually replace light rail cars. And that we were expanding a system, light rail, that was already struggling mightily to simply meet any basic standards of cost efficiency, or for that matter, just basic ridership, just providing a service for residents in a way that I think residents and taxpayers can reasonably expect. And what we had talked about extensively was a full replacement, going from light rail to a rubber tire solution, not a hybrid, which was studied here, but a full replacement. And I'm guessing that you kind of contemplated that in the option 3, but option 3 packs in a ton of cost for grade separations, right? So there's everything can be grade separated, which I think we all agree costs billions and billions of dollars. It's not going to happen this decade, although we'd love to see more grade seps in all places in our valley. And so I'm wondering why we didn't study an autonomous system that can operate with buses, that can be incremental. Let's face it, we're going to need drivers and we're going to need human beings on those buses to work for VTA regardless for many years, because autonomy is emerging incrementally. Why didn't we study a transition to a rubber tire solution that would supplant light rail?
Sure. I would like to take that kind of question in 2 parts, right? There's the autonomous part of it, which I think you correctly stated, where we believe autonomous operations are coming to everything. Most likely we'll need an operator on these vehicles, maybe forever. We don't really know what the timeline looks for that.
Sure.
I think the key, what we're looking at though, is a rubber tired vehicle specifically that could operate on the light rail corridors. Our second scenario, where we integrated the buses into the light rail network, was kind of our step towards that. What we were finding is that we believe a full system conversion, because of our large system, could take decades. Just to rip out the tracks, pave new tracks, or pave the area instead of putting the tracks in. Also, something like that would take some pretty significant costs that we haven't seen here. It may require completely rebuilding a new bus yard, for example, to have all those buses. And just another random example is that the way tracks work today, there's the ballast, the rocks under the tracks that typically work for drainage. We may have to figure out how to do drainage for center running bus lanes throughout the system for a large length.
Right.
Also, just to give you another idea, BRT costs, because I think that kind of system is similar to a BRT system, like basically.
Yeah, that was a natural transition for BRT. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And BRT costs are roughly 50 to 100 million per mile. Those are typically the costs that we've seen throughout the country. So, it may be a cheaper conversion than what we are showing in scenario 2, but there would be still some significant capital expenses to achieve that kind of system.
Assuming that you're running in a segregated lane, right?
Yes.
One that would be exclusive.
Mhm.
And so I just think all those assumptions, I think really need to be unpacked. I really appreciate the work that's been done. I know there's been an extensive amount of work here, but we've done some work here in the city of San Jose as well. And our outreach with the industry suggests that autonomy is not a 15-year solution. It's not that far away. We know today in Gainesville on 2nd Avenue, there are self-driving buses being operated, and the University of Florida is very involved in that, and they're operating on public roads. They're not exclusive right away. They're on public roads. And in cities like Jacksonville and Las Vegas today, they're running on their own designated lanes, which, by the way, we have in the form of bus rapid transit. And we also have designated right away with light rail. And so it seems to me we have the infrastructure in place to enable an incremental solution that would enable a full transformation. But I don't know why we're chaining ourselves to light rail as this technology of the past, which has not been particularly impressive by any objective measure. And I don't know why we're feeling so conservative that we can't simply at least fully understand and analyze what a full transformation looks like. And when I was having these conversations with Nuria and Teresa and others, we were concerned about a few things. One is the fact that we want a transit system that's future-proofed. We know that part of the problem with fare box return on light rail has been land use, right? I think we all agree land use development has not come along in a way in any, frankly, they were never integrated well in this system decades ago. It was very poor planning. I think all would agree. But to future-proof a system with changing land uses probably means that you would want an autonomous bus system that could actually take a left or right turn off of a fixed line to enable you to reach density that may be 2 or 3 blocks away. And that could tremendously drive ridership in ways that you can't do today because you're stuck to a rail system. I mean, we know that, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Mayor,
sorry.
I thought you'd finish your sentence. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh yeah, if I could just finish. I just think, we are Silicon Valley, and it's troubling to me that we're not even looking at what's going on in other communities in our own country, let alone what's going on in the world. I mean, we could go to Asia and Europe and see extraordinary development happening right now with autonomy. I don't see that being presented in ways that help us understand what a full transformation might look like. And it's troubling because this industry is in our backyard right now. And the fact that PUC hasn't figured out, yet, where they're at. Look, we all know the regulation is going to evolve with the technology. But I think we have to start with a basic assumption, which is the status quo isn't sustainable. And it hasn't been proven to be successful or sustainable for several decades. And I just feel like, the scenario 3 is a bit of a straw man because it contemplates an enormous amount of investment that we may not have to make. Autonomy is working in various ways today on public roads. And why we believe that we can only operate it with grade separations, only in designated lanes. That might be the autonomy today, and that's fine. But it seems to me we're going to need to make a lot of transformations anyway. For example, you talk about the bus conversion yard. We're already making a transition to electric buses. That's going to require an enormous amount of transition infrastructure that we're undertaking today. You could imagine that if you had a single system, bus rapid transit light rail, that was merged into a single unified technology, That autonomous bus, and yes, human beings are still going to be required to be on board for many years, if not forever. This is something that could be a tremendous benefit in terms of ridership, in terms of fare box return, and in terms of safety. And so I just feel like I would like to see us push a little harder on the analysis and be a little bolder and look at what a full transformation looks like. And let's really understand what the costs are. I understand there's some costs in what we do to transform rocks into pavement along the rail. But as you indicated, there are technologies today where they're laying down panels to do just that. And I would just really like to understand that much better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're going to go to Vice Chair Jones.
I'm sorry, Chair Hendricks, I just wanted to, could I add just a couple quick points to Mayor Liccardo's questions for clarification?
Sure.
My apologies. I did just want to add that in terms of a fare question, I do want everybody to keep in mind that this affects our entire system, that part of our fare structure is intentionally reflecting the fact that we as a county have decided to tax ourselves as a way to keep our fares down, in part due for our disadvantaged population. So in some ways, the fact that we have a lower fare recovery has been a conscious decision on our part to fund some of our transit operations with sales taxes instead of fares. So that is something we can look at in much more directly
respond to
about
that.
let me make a couple of points. The other point I want to make is very much so, though, that what we're bringing to you in terms of scenarios, this very much is a work in progress. And so what we are looking from you is, if these are not the right scenarios, if you want us to look at different scenarios, we can change gears. We are not looking for recommendations. These are not the final scenarios. So we are very much open to shifting gears on these scenarios. And then the last quick point I wanted to make is that one of the things I'm very pleased has come out of this study and what Jason has presented is that he has come up with some ideas that we can extend the life of our light rail vehicles. And what we didn't know a year and a half ago when we started this study is that we have a little bit more time to look at these scenarios, so we're not feeling quite as rushed to make the recommendation. So sorry, just wanted to make those quick points.
Okay, Sam, I think you wanted to have a quick response.
Yeah, I just, on the fare box return, look, virtually every system in the United States subsidizes its transit with tax revenue. It's not because we made a deliberate choice to subsidize our system with taxes. It's because unlike those other systems, we have dramatically lower ridership per capita and per dollar spent. And if we had much higher ridership, we would have better fare box return. We are taxing ourselves out of necessity, in part because we don't have very high fare box return, because we haven't been matching development patterns with transit very well. That's been poor planning, to be sure. I don't blame people at VTA for the fact that they got stuck trying to run transit in a largely suburban set of communities. And we're all trying to grapple with that and retrofit in various ways to address it. But I don't sort of buy the assumption that we've made a conscious choice to have low fare box return by taxing ourselves. I think all the folks who pay taxes would far rather see much more service for their taxes rather than simply subsidizing what has been a system that in many ways, I think many advocates would agree, does not serve our community as well as we'd like it to. And it's purely a function of our inability to drive ridership.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to move on to some of our other colleagues here. Vice Chair Jones.
Thank you, Chair. When I look at the system and I think about speed, reliability, high capacity, I think about grade separation, tunneling, dedicated right-of-way as a driver to increase ridership and have a more efficient and effective system. I know that the CPC did not recommend option 3. So Jason, I want to understand why that wasn't recommended. Was it just purely cost, or were there other factors involved?
I think cost was a pretty large factor of that. Also, just the amount of changes that would need to be made to allow for tunneling or to allow for large elevated structures. There'd be some pretty significant impacts to the communities and to our passengers to really go forward with that construction. The CPUC also wanted us to focus on the modes that made the most sense for VTA. And during the CPC meetings, what we really found was that the modes such as light rail and buses, whether they're automated or not, are really the modes that kind of make the most sense for us as we understand these modes right now.
And those costs were based on, how'd you come up with those cost numbers? What was
Sure.
your rationale?
Yeah, they're based on some recent projects that were constructed for elevated guideway type transit systems throughout the country. I believe a more somewhat recent one was the one in Honolulu for a elevated grade separated light metro system. So a lot of these structures for those costs were associated with kind of projects like that. The vehicle costs were some assumptions we made based off of typical projects, as well as actually some of the information we got from the San Jose Airport Diridon Stevens Creek RFI.
Speaking of which, I'd like to ask Ramses to get back on. I have a question for him about the RFI. While waiting for him to, actually he's on. So Ramses, I wanted to ask you to provide us some additional detail around the RFI in terms of some of the new technologies, costs associated with those technologies, and how they relate to the costs that we're seeing in the staff's report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Jones. Again, Ramses Madhu, Division Manager of Planning, Policy, and Sustainability for the Department of Transportation in San Jose. The RFI, which we worked with VTA on to develop and get through, looked at two different corridors, the airport to Diridon and then Diridon out to Stevens Creek. And the project looked at those two corridors mostly because Stevens Creek is probably the next highest level ridership corridor that we can build that also touches San Jose. And the high capacity transit study that VTA is carrying out right now is kind of sharing or supporting that. And the airport connector is a project that's already adopted in Measure A from 2000. And we wanted to ask the question of, can we develop transit faster and cheaper than the current model? Right, and it's a big question that we all are struggling with right here, right? We're talking about $450 million to replace the light rail fleet. And is there a different way to do this? And we were not asked, and there's a lot of very important pieces here, but the question that's been worked on here by VTA staff isn't what should we do with new systems, right? It's what should we do with the current system? And I think that's really important to distinguish, because I think that there's oh my gosh, like look at this new thing that we're trying to do over here that should kind of throw all this work out of the door, right? And I think we need to be really careful with that. But what we did learn in the RFI is this. There are companies like Lightways, who actually just presented earlier to you during public comment, that are very close to having these systems in hand. Two, that their cost structures beyond the sunk basic costs, right? You hit utilities, utility work is utility work. It costs a lot of money, right? Putting up pillars is putting up pillars, and that's kind of basic. But what we learned in that was that there's a good reason to believe that some of the fundamental hardware costs around developing transit systems could be different with these new systems, right? And this means things like all of the, think about a BART or a light rail, there's a lot of track and there's a lot of signals and there's a lot of advanced systems that have to come along on that track. And when you're looking at these new systems, all of that ends up inside the vehicles, except for some of the basic pieces, right? And this is a fundamental change to how we could develop the infrastructure to support it. Now, does that cost just sink into the vehicles? Very reasonable question to ask. At the moment, it doesn't seem like it. It does not seem like the cost of the vehicles, even though you're talking about a lot more vehicles, right? Right now, there's a discussion around potentially setting up a system like this between the airport and Diridon, right? Kind of following up on that RFI. And the vehicle numbers are up in the 400 range just for that little section. Even with that number of vehicle and the cost numbers that are available through the proposals that are being developed, don't in any way make the bar come back up, right? So there is good reason to believe that there is a new cost structure for developing transit coming soon. Now, I commend Jason and the VTA group to really trying to bear into this very difficult question of what do we do with the light rail system as is and in the tracks and all that kind of stuff. And I do support the idea that we should be talking about transition towards potential other technologies. But I think that we have learned that the Honolulu example is not the example we should be using in scenario 3. And that if we are actually talking about that level of systems change, we should be talking about these other ideas that are out there and that we have a lot of information on, and that's coming more and more every day. And I feel like there's a lot to be said about trying, we need to have the conservative scenario, right? We have to. We're public agencies. We have to be as responsible as possible to making that work. But we also need to offer the board and the public, real looks into what is possible, right? And that does, mean taking some risks in terms of what the project and strategies could be. Last thing I will say is that we do know, or we have a lot of information around these new systems may not need to be grade separated in total, right? We asked for that when we put out the RFI for the Stevens Creek and Airport connector, because we believe that that grade separation is key to alleviating many of the speed problems and reliability problems that we're all seeing in the system, right? But the information we got back was, well, we think we can run at grade or grade separated. And yes, CPUC is the big barrier. That's absolutely right. But CPUC is not a big bad boogeyman. CPUC is a group of folks that want to see technology move forward as well. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Ramses. And that ties into the next point I wanted to make. And that was that, first of all, Jason, I know that you put a lot of effort and hard work into your report and the presentation, but at least my expectation was to see different scenarios. One is, maintain the status quo, but also seeing other scenarios in terms of what the possibilities are, particularly around the right-of-way and any system that can operate on right-of-way or dedicated lanes, as well as an analysis of the different options. That means an ROI or other metrics for options 1, 2, and 3 that will give us a comparison of cost, increased ridership, and other factors and benchmarks that will help us make a decision. So my request is to continue to do an analysis on option 3, the right-of-way, as well as give us an analysis comparing the 3 options based on specific metrics. So that's my input in my recommendations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chappie.
Chair Hendricks.
Jason, can we do this? Can you try and make notes about what you want to respond? I want to try and make sure we get through all the board being able to put their comments out before we're trying to respond to everything.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'm going to go next to member Abe Koga.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I also appreciate my colleagues from San Jose and their comments, and Mr. Ramsey too. As you may be aware, Mountain View has done an HET study as well, and it seems like our conclusions are very similar to what the San Jose delegation just shared. And so that's been my interest, is that, I agree. I think the light rail system, and we've been talking about this since I was on VTA 10 years ago, about, low ridership and the challenges of speed and whatnot. And so looking at this study, my hope was that this would be an opportunity to begin to look at new technologies. And in light of the fact that sounds like the South End and the North End are doing similar studies, and maybe there could be some opportunity to combine and look at the light rail system what we have and repurposing at least parts of it, if not all of it, to build a more innovative system. And our challenge is we're a small city. The cost of doing an HET on our own is way more than one city could afford. But and so I'd been wondering if we could use the light rail system, or at least our part of it, to would that help in lowering the costs? The other part issue, or the other opportunity we're looking at is, as we have redone our general plan and our precise plan, and specifically the North Bayshore area where Google and other companies are, we have implemented a transportation fee for new developments. And so that would be an opportunity to find funding, to get funding, but we would need, of course, VTA's help and commitment to looking at further studying the possibility of a new system, and really looking at the costs, and then how much of a fee we could implement. So that was my hope, was that we do look at new, not a full aerial was what we were looking at. It's some kind of combination. So I think, as Vice Chair Jones mentioned, having options for option 3 is where I was hoping we could go to. So that would be my request. Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to go to Member Burt.
Thank you. So I concur with the other board members who have spoken so far, that I'd really like to see this as the beginning of an analysis, and not kind of something that is really attempting to have definitive determination of where we're going. The emerging technologies, we're really looking at a transition from 20th century technologies to 21st century technologies. And for a long while, these 21st century technologies were imagined, but they were reliant on development of technical elements that weren't mature yet. Artificial intelligence, advanced sensor technologies, and advancements in propulsion technologies. Those are all happening right now at a very rapid pace. And most of these companies that are, whether it's in the personal rapid transit or other technologies that we've talked about, have moved from being pure technology developers to integrators of technologies that have been advanced through other segments. That's a much more doable task, and on a nearer horizon. And that's why we're seeing this just rapid acceleration from something that was always 5 or 10 years out to something that is, in all likelihood, first operating systems just a few years out now. And I don't want to see us locked into something that is going to be less beneficial to our riders, most of all those who really rely on the transit system. We have the potential to have new technologies and new systems that will provide much greater service, that will drive demand and use of the transit, because it's going to have, some of these have essentially infinite headway, 1 minute headway. I mean, we talk about headway and how that affects ridership, but when it's on demand on small pod cars, it's almost immediate. Rides that are origin to destination, so that we don't have so many stops and a slow system because of that. It's not principally, or not certainly not solely, about the speed of the cars. It's about how many stops may not need to occur in the future, and also about safety. We have some of these systems that can be not only separated at far lower cost than what we had looked at because they're lightweight systems, but we're talking about car safety now. because these smaller systems, they're in the last year, a number of these companies have rapidly integrated sanitizing of small cars between each ride, and they're small cars and you don't have to share them. So I think there are a bunch of advantages that have been understated or underappreciated in the analysis so far. I think we really need to look at continuing to have this aggressive approach. And I think that we may want to look at how we can set up a system that is focused on this, of a combination of our staff who has really been wading into this, and third-party experts that we can bring in, and maybe a subset of the board who really continues to engage on this and attempts to push the ball forward, because I think it's the future, and I think that we can provide far superior transit at a lower cost in the coming years through some of these emerging technologies.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're going to go to member Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just make it really brief because I essentially agree with everything that people before me have said. I would like to contribute to that conversation by saying that out of the 3 categories, I would support a category 4 that was labeled something like integrate and innovate. I don't think it needs to be or should be an either or situation. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Next, we're going to go to member Perales.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I want to say thank you as well for the analysis that was done. I think that, there's a couple, I don't even want to call them realizations, because the reality is we already know the challenges that we have. But, we talk about focusing on ensuring and maintaining we have the system, which includes bus and light rail and paratransit, for the riders that may need it the most today. And I think we can't forget that, but we also can't only focus on that, because the reality is if we don't get more people out of their cars that don't actually need or depend on public transit, we're never going to get out of this cycle of low fare box recovery, the challenge of low ridership. We need to have a system that is convincing enough, that is efficient enough, where individuals that don't depend on public transit will choose to take it. And I think if we don't sort of think bigger and shifting that mindset, we may make all sorts of changes to the system and continue to serve the same riders. And obviously it was noted and should be noted that one of the challenges is how land has been developed. And if you don't have even the opportunity of riders in developments near stations, well, then clearly you're already at a disadvantage. So there's other factors I think that play in. For me, I think one of the questions maybe we should have asked would be if you completely sort of take all of the current challenges out and even the current opportunities, and you just look at asking the question, what would be the best and most efficient transportation system, public transportation system for the valley here, and then begin to map that out and maybe go backwards from there, recognizing that that's not reality, that we have a right-of-way system, right? We have currently rail down and bus rapid transit lanes. And so we currently have that, but I think rather than start from there and try to force in whatever the best solution may be, I'd like for in the next look at this to kind of say, go really big and look at what is if we were to completely say eliminate, if we were going to be eliminating light rail and not necessarily this scenario 3 that was presented here that looks at, well, just an elevated guideway or something, maybe the right of way is in a completely different location, or what I envision is just a heck of a lot more, whether it's bus or BRT lines or light rail track, whatever it may be. I think when you look at the map overall over the Santa Clara County area, you literally look at it and, well, it's not easy to get to a lot of places and to get there efficiently. And hence, if you have the means to a car, which so many people do here, that's your choice. You choose a car. And so I think if we looked at how do we actually, what is the biggest change? What is the best scenario? And look at that and then work backwards maybe versus working forwards. That may be something that I would be interested in seeing. And the other thing would be, I think, falling back into reality. I think going the other way based on building on the work you've already done, I would agree with my colleagues that I don't think it should be so cut and dry on some of these different scenarios. And I don't necessarily know if that was staff's intent, but I do think that we could look at some of the deficiencies in the system and what do some of these improvements do, or could we plug them into certain places? It's always been discussed, at least within the core of the system, right, in the district I represent in downtown San Jose, that is one of the major choke points, right? And that if we could make what would be significant investment, but if we could make it to either underground the system there or right, get the grade crossing in the downtown core, or even have a bypass track, which I know this is has its own major challenges around the 87-280 corridor. But if we had an ability to have sort of your two parallel, if you want to get into the downtown, you can. If you don't, you have an opportunity to go around it. I think looking at some of those choke points, if we are going to go ahead and stick down the path that we've been going, which is hey, let's work with what we got and let's see how we might improve it. I would agree that it should be a hybrid of some of the opportunities. We should be looking at where the biggest deficiencies are. But I'll circle back to the beginning, which no matter what we do in the system, we know one of the biggest deficiencies is the ridership. And so I do appreciate that staff obviously highlighted that we do need to be cognizant of that as we decide to do whatever. If it's to keep the system we have going today and make the investments in new trains, right? If whatever decision we make doesn't include truly looking at how to increase the ridership, which obviously is the speed of the system, right? Which is things that we can work on, but it's also things that we need, right? Development within the transit stops and the transit corridor. It's also where we need to prioritize transit and public transit, mass transit over the single occupancy vehicle, which is the majority of what people use to get to and fro today. You could pull this board, and the majority of the board is likely to be solo drivers than overall transit users. And so I think that's one of the challenges that I think that we also have to incorporate. It's not going to be just the best and brightest new system. It's going to be how are we actually going to make some of the bold moves to get people into public transit. And I know obviously a lot of this work is happening in different silos within the agency as we're doing our TOD development. Clearly, right, we're conscious, I think, of these things, but I think that that has to fold its way into this as well, because those are major factors in the investments that we'll make in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Member Montano.
Thank you, Chair. As I've been listening to everyone, I think there are some really key points, and it's speed. Speed is the reason why we don't have a lot of ridership is because the cars are too slow. So I really feel that we need to keep and improve the existing light rail system. And I heard that the average speed is 15 to 25 miles per hour. And that's unacceptable. That's why people don't get on the trains. So we've never really, well, actually the light rail cars have never really had the potential to go fast because of the existing grade crossings. So I feel that we need to incentivize ridership so that way we can by improving the speed. I just want to share that I live near the light rail, and every day I always see only like a few people on those cars and the light rail cars, and it's very disheartening because I'm thinking all this money that the taxpayers have poured into the system to VTA so that way they can get to from point A to point B. And Milpitas, as you know, we are the major crossroads, 680, 880, going on to 237, to Mountain View, Sunnyvale, where all the jobs are at, all the high-tech companies are at. And we are the most congested area in the region. And I really feel we need to do something because the population is growing, and it's only going to get worse as some of our the directors have mentioned. So we do need to make some bold moves, as Councilmember Perales had mentioned. And what that is I don't know. We have to just brainstorm. But I do feel that having elevated light rail is possibly a way to go. Not in all of the system, but in certain corridors. For example, 237. Perhaps maybe making the median in 237 just for the light rail, so that way there won't be any grade crossings, no stops. It just goes straight forward. So we really do need to do something, and what that is, we're going to have to work as a team and find out and just brainstorm, and all these ideas are helping us to come up with a plan. So those are my thoughts, and I know we need to take some action because we do need to make some bold moves. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Chavez.
Thank you. I want to start by just acknowledging a couple things. One, I want to thank the staff for the very good work. And I also just want to say to my colleagues, I think they started the presentation by saying that they wanted everybody's input. This isn't done. There was no decision being made, and that we're in the beginning of the process, not the end. And I wanted to acknowledge that. The other thing I wanted to say is that early on, as part of the study being launched, and I say this especially for the newer board members, one of the admonitions of some of the board had been to ask the staff to not bring ideas forward that weren't in use someplace in the world. And I say that because the board now is saying, look a little into your crystal ball, which I think is fine. But I also just want to say that I think staff was given slightly different direction in the beginning. And even the examples that have been used by some of my colleagues are both experimental, they're in, like less than a mile lane. And so if in fact what we're asking for is a little bit of crystal ball, then I would just say that would add maybe the fourth column or the fifth column. But I think that's fine as long as we're going to be consistent. I just wanted to say we do have a third-party consultant who presented today, and we do have a committee that's been looking at this. And I would just recommend that committee make sure that they're getting updates monthly, even if it's verbally. And I think it's the CMPP. I always forget every acronym that we have, and I just say that again for the newer board members. They may not know that was already occurring. I was struck by a conversation I had yesterday about board governance, and just listening to this discussion, what I'm reminded of is that we have the responsibility of transit and no land use powers ourselves. And as we look at governance, I would just say for those of you who are interested in governance change, the most significant thing in my mind isn't whether or not we have full-time or part-time board members, how many there are. I think the size of the board is fine. I think the real question is, what powers does this board have? And the other thing I would say to all the cities who are on here in the county too, how collaborative are we with VTA when we're wearing our city hats and not our VTA hats? Because part of the reason we're having challenges is we have fundamentally not necessarily lived up to building and allowing for significant densities along both bus routes and even our bus rapid transit, all of that, we have to change out of ourselves. Like, I think lecturing the staff about land use is not productive because it's not them, it's actually us. The last thing I just wanted to add is that I want to just hit on the last thing that I heard Member Montano say about speed. You know, I do think that one of the most important things that we have to acknowledge is that if transit doesn't get you there at least as fast as your car, there's very little motivation, and not to be Captain Obvious with all of you, but let's be clear. And that what that means is that from my perspective, it is a little less about the technology, a lot more about the speed. And an example of that is, Caltrain's pretty old technology, like a jillion, 100 and I don't know, 200 years. But it's faster, and people pay quite a lot to be on it. And so I think what we want to really focus on is the things we know: speed, frequency, safety. We all know that. So I just want to chime in on this piece to say, I think the one thing I want to make sure is we actually do look at the routing, whether it's, no matter what technology we're looking at. I think, the routing is really critical, and the speed is really critical. And, whether it's rubber tire or not, I think we can't get away from, if the route impacts speed and access, then we have to take a look at the route as we're going through this. And the reason I'm sharing this with my colleagues now is that we all know that the Caltrain, the Diridon station, is really being examined for how all of our different modes of transportation are getting in and out of there. This is the one opportunity we're going to have to add another route for light rail through that station that doesn't necessarily go through downtown. So, we've raised this a number of times, and I'm just going to say that as the Diridon Policy Advisory Board meets, the one report out I'm going to want to understand is, how is light rail going to go through there, or whatever it is that we're using long term? Because the right of way actually does have a significant amount of value to VTA. So anyway, those are my thoughts, and I really appreciated hearing from my colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm not seeing any other of my colleagues' hands up right now, so I'm going to go ahead and share a few thoughts. As we started this whole project and exercise, I was always trying to look and be able to understand what was the light rail right of way versus the light rail rail. And I really always come back to, it's what is the right of way and what we're going to do. One of the things I'd like us to see be able to try and focus more before we get to deciding what the answer is as I was listening to all this, what came to me is, what is the outcome we're trying to achieve? If we change technology, don't change technology. And to me, it came to speed, frequency, cost, flexibility, and safety. Those are really the outcomes, or the vectors we're trying to get into. And that falls into, here, what is the best way to utilize the right of way, and not necessarily the technology of what's there. And several of you have mentioned this to me. It's all, what are the changes that we're talking about doing and how it's going to improve ridership, right? I mean, we have to be able to say, if we're changing X, it's because we're going to be able to get Y on ridership. And I think as a part of this, no matter what we look towards the future, we have to look at changes in our signal prioritization. Signal prioritization and grade separations are, signal priority is, we want to deconflict so we can make things go faster. Signal prioritization is a less expensive way than going to grade separation. It's just as the way we look at it. To the comment, if we are ending up with new cars, new vehicles, or whatever, one of the things that came to me is, how standard are the vehicles that we're going to be looking to try and acquire when we go out to whatever company? I would hope we're trying to be as standardized as we can with other agencies, so that we're not, and I think that'll just drive into the cost. One of the things, Jason, you had a cost slide, and when we show costs, it might be relevant to show the benefits we achieve, because on the slide you had, it just showed raw cost, and it didn't talk about, well, what do you get for that cost? Sometimes spending $100 is better than spending $10, because you get more value for the $100 you spent. And we just, when we talk cost, we always need to compare it back to value. In terms of what, you asked what should we drop or needs to be further analyzed. On one hand, I want to say drop the third section because that just implied we had to have a completely grade separated answer. And I just think that's too expensive in the transition of how you get there. But I would like to continue to see more about what it is to transition to a rubber tired vehicle, because I think that gives us more flexibility. And the last point I just want to go ahead and say, and I think this is really to everybody, we understand what we have today as a system and where we are. And I think we're trying to talk about where we want to go and what the end state is that we're trying to achieve. But to me, the most critical part of discussing the end state is how we would transition there, right? I don't think we can create a definition of an end state that we can't, through a series of steps, get to. Because I don't think whatever it is that we talk about doing with this, let's just say here, we're going to go to a whole new elevated thing or to whatever, we're not going to take and stop all the light rail service for 4 years while we change everything in the right of way to whatever the new technology is. So we know where we are and we know what we don't like about where we are. And we want to define an end state that we want to achieve, but that end state has to be something that we can achieve through probably some kind of incremental multiple steps to achieve that. So I think transition is going to become a very important part in whatever our ultimate decision looks like. So we've got about 10 minutes left in our time right here, not that we have to use it. I just wanted to check to my colleagues if there's any last short comments you guys would like to go ahead and make. And then we'll see if staff's got a real quick thing. And my question to staff is, did you get the feedback from us that you wanted? And before we do that, how about Member Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I completely agree with what you're saying about transitions. I would like to add that when we talk about going forward, it would be nice to be able to allow for the innovative solutions, even if they're not, about, the vehicular solutions that are, on the roads. So, I mean, when we think about transitions, maybe we can think about, particular lines that aren't there, and think about whether we can, produce innovation there and also integrate with what we have, be it light rail or bus lines. And then I wanted to make one comment, and I don't want to say that, this is one of these types of situations where we can't have, the necessary economic density there in order to more vibrantly support, particular, solutions or innovations. But I think it's just a fact of life that politically we do have a situation where if we really want to look at transit in our county and, work backwards from what is an ideal, hopefully future-proof solution that'll set us economically in a really vibrant, kind of manner, similar to what we've had in the last 30 years for the next 100 years, then I think we really do need to look at some of these political realities. I think if we put the infrastructure in, the density will come eventually. But if you look at some of these communities, including my own, I'll admit, it almost becomes a complete deterrent to being able to get the political support for these types of solutions. So I would just like to put that out there. I mean, I'm not trying to, take up the banner of, let's not do this, let's not put anything in, let's not welcome people in, because I'm completely supporting and supportive of the idea of integration and being able to, build iteratively and thoughtfully. But, it's just something to think about if we're really trying to achieve a really effective solution. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Member Constantine.
Thank you, Chair. And as a new member, and I promise that this will be one of the only times I will say as a new member to use that as a crutch, But I wonder all my colleagues' comments. And
excuse me, Rich. Rich, could you maybe turn your video off because your audio is breaking up?
Am I breaking up?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Good. You don't have to see me anyway. But what I was going to say is that whatever we decide, we really have to make sure that this is something that is far into the future, and that we don't just make decisions based on, especially when it comes to financial issues, that are just based on today. Because one of the analogies I love to give is that in New York, if you were going to be if you were going to build the New York subway system today, people would say it's too expensive and no one's going to ride it. Well, I will just tell you that the New York subway system began operation in 1904. So whatever we decide, we really have to think long term and make sure that whatever we put forward has a good foundation, that we will be able to use innovation but continue the system as it is. And I know that's not going to be an easy thing. We're asking our staff to really have crystal balls, but again, I really want us to think far into the future, and where we may be limited by what we feel our financial stability is, we should really sometimes ignore it, to be perfectly honest. So that's my comment. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thanks. I don't see any of the other of my colleagues' hands up. I'm going to go back to staff and go.
I have one. Can I make one more comment?
Yeah, quickly, please.
So
quickly.
Just I follow through with Rich Constantine's remarks. I really feel that we need to sacrifice in the short term, so that way in the long term, in the future, we can have a system that will be include speed and include all those other safety and all those other factors that that VTA implements on. So I really like Rich Constantine's forward thinking. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I don't see any other hands up. I'm going to go back to staff. You presented some really good information to us, and you wanted to hear some dialogue and feedback from the board. And so my question to staff is, did you get what you wanted to get out of this meeting?
Thank you, Chair Hendricks. Yes, very much so. Really appreciate all the board members and all of your feedback. This is exactly what we were looking for, that we really did bring these scenarios to you. We tried to do enough detail on the scenarios so that we would get feedback, not to imply that the scenarios were set in stone, but we didn't want to have them be so vague that we didn't prompt you to give the feedback. So we will take your feedback into account. We really heard you about I wrote down speed, frequency, safety, cost, flexibility. Really, what can we do to develop scenarios that has a focus on how do we increase ridership, and what is that technology in the future that we can put into place that really brings us into the future. And then the other thing I wanted to echo is that I think the other thing that we got out of this study is that someplace that's different, and thank you, Board Member Chavez, for pointing this out, is we have a little bit different direction than we had 2 years ago, but also we've got a little bit more time than we thought we had 2 years ago, when we thought we only had a couple of years to make this very huge decision. So we've got some time to really learn more about these emerging technologies and how quickly are they going to emerge within the time frame we have to make these decisions. So we will keep working on this, and we will kind of further evolve these scenarios and be coming back to you as we develop these concepts. So yes, thank you very much for your feedback.
Yeah, and we'll get together offline and figure out what is the right timing and ability, because I think being able to bring this topic back to the board, and again, where we can have continue the dialogue in kind of a workshop fashion like this is going to make a lot of sense. But we'll have to figure. You guys need time to do and process everything you got from us here. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close this item out. It's not an action item, so we don't need to take a vote or anything. I'm going to move on to item 4, which is announcements. The only announcement I have is that a reminder to everyone that our next regular board meeting is scheduled for Thursday, March 4th at 5:30 and going to be held via video and teleconference. Did anyone else have any other announcements they'd like to make? I'm not seeing anybody there. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting. And we're going to adjourn to the new member board orientation. This is to my colleagues. If you're attending the orientation meeting, just go ahead and stay on here. Members of the public may attend the orientation. And if you have any comments, please send them via email to the office of the board secretary. So this is the closure of the workshop. I want to thank everybody for attending. We're going to go ahead and start the board orientation meeting next, but I think we're going to give everybody a 5-minute break for us to go ahead and do that. So by my clock, we're going to start at about 11:04. So thanks, everybody. I think staff really appreciated your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Glad to see the Hawaiian shirt back.
We don't get a 5-minute break.
It never went away.
Or you wore it under your suit, huh?
It's a mindset.
There you go.
Mahalo, Glenn.
Abuhay.
Okay, well, I'm going to step away for a minute. I'll be back at 11:04.
Oh, thank you for a little break.